This episode is brought to you by Indie Film Hustle TV, the world's first streaming service dedicated to filmmakers, screenwriters, and content creators. Learn more at indiefilmhustle.tv. Then how, in God's green earth, did you come up with Bloodsport? And how did you get involved with Bloodsport? How did you meet Jean-Claude? Because before you answer this question, I just want everybody to understand. When you look at Bloodsport now, everyone's like, oh, that looks kind of like, oh, we've seen that 1,000 times. I'm like, but when Bloodsport came out, there was nothing ever.
It was really fresh.
The only thing that's even remotely close to it and a much smaller level was Enter the Dragon, and at a much smaller level. But the concept of these character fighters, which sounds like Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat. I mean,
all based on Bloodsport.
You launched billions and billion-dollar industries off of this one movie. Not to mention a young Belgian guy named Jean-Claude.
Right. All right, so we'll skip ahead to Bloodsport.
Yes.
So here's how I got to that. I wrote a screenplay called Firebase, which is basically, you ever see Zulu?
Yeah, I remember. Oh, God, I remember Zulu, yeah.
Small group of British guys being besieged by thousands of Zulus in Africa. So I saw this movie and was really knocked out by it. And I came up with this idea, Firebase, which is kind of the same story. It's like a disparate group of Americans on this hilltop fire base in South Vietnam, and they get attacked by hordes of Viet Cong and North Vietnamese and have to fight them off. And it was this small group there were three different groups. There were Marines, Army, the Army guys were the artillery guys on the hilltop with the artillery pieces, and then some Army Rangers, and they all end up together. Not that they're supposed to be together, but they kind of get forced into this situation. And they all dislike one another at first, but then once they get attacked, then they start banding together, and it's basically teamwork against this invading horde. So anyways, I wrote this screenplay, and there were a lot of people that were very impressed with it, including I actually had a meeting. Walter Hill and Joel Silver had read it. Mm-hmm. They liked it, and Walter Hill wanted to make it his next movie. So I actually had a meeting with them about that. It didn't happen simply because Walter Hill had a deal with Paramount. This is right after, I think...
48 Hours?
48 Hours, right after 48 Hours. And so he brings them this big Vietnam War piece, and they basically said, guys, come on, nobody wants to see a movie about Vietnam. This is all pre-Platoon. Okay?
Of course.
So it ended up not happening. But in the meanwhile, I had gotten myself an agent based on somebody reading the script and saying, hey, you need an agent. And they got it to this guy, Harold Moskowitz. And Harold also represented this guy named Frank Dukes. And Frank had written a book that took place in Vietnam called The Last Rainbow. And it was 1,000 pages long.
Jesus.
Frank wrote this 1,000, like this, typewritten. He had written this book, and Harold was thinking, I could probably sell this book if I could cut it in half. So he got in touch with me and said, look, I want you to read this book, and let me know if you'd be interested in editing it down so that it's only 500 pages. So I read the book, and I was kind of impressed with it. It was pretty well written. Frank's actually not a bad writer, which is a surprising fact about him. Actually, shouldn't be surprising because he makes up so many stories. Anyways, so I was impressed with the writing, with the book, and he did a lot of research. So Frank used to tell people back then that he was a Vietnam veteran, he won all these medals, he was this war hero, all of which turned out to be complete bullshit. But he read books, he listened to stories from people, and he put this all together. and it sounded pretty authentic to me. And I was actually in Vietnam myself, and as I'm reading this book, and I'm thinking, well, this sounds like this guy might have actually been there.
All right.
So I wanted to meet him, and I got his number from Harold, and we got together, and we just kind of hit it off right away. And at the time, Frank had a couple of martial arts studios. He might have only had one at the time that I first met him. But he pretty much was telling people, he made up this myth about himself, that he was trained in the secret art of ninjutsu. There was he had a teacher, kind of like Mr. Miyagi and Karate Kid, whose name was Tiger Tanaka. Okay, Tiger Tanaka, by the way, happens to be a character in a James Bond book called You Only Live Twice, but Frank borrowed the name and said that was my teacher, and he was a descendant from, like 40 generations of ninja, and he taught me personally the secret art of ninjutsu. So he had this martial arts dojo, and another thing that he would say, he had some flyers for the school, and he would say that he was the first Westerner to compete in this contest called the Kumite.
Is that a Kumite real or not?
Apparently not.
Oh my God.
Apparently not. No,
oh my God.
He was making all this shit up. Because, and again, he did research. He read books. There were books about ninja. There was martial arts magazines at the time.
Sure. And no internet. No Google.
No internet to check up on this stuff. And there was there was a movie called Enter the Dragon, which is basically, it's not by any means is it the same story. Enter the Dragon is basically about cops infiltrating this island stronghold that's run by this drug lord, human trafficking lord. And I guess that's the dragon. We have to find a way to enter the dragon. We've got to take this guy down. That's what the story's about. It's not about a tournament. But he happens to have tournaments on his island every so often. And at one of these tournaments, and actually I believe that's how Bruce Lee's entree to the island is. He's going there to participate in the tournament. So that's how we ended up with the tournaments. Anyways, so Frank had seen this movie. A lot of people had seen this movie. It was actually released by Warner Brothers.
It was huge hit. Yeah.
So Frank made up this whole story about this competition called the Kumite. And Frank has got, there's this psychological disturbance called the Walter Mitty syndrome, or the Walter Mitty complex. This is a real thing. You can look it up on the internet, and there are psychiatrists that have studied this. And Walter Mitty, I don't know if you've ever heard of the film. Well, actually,
the one with Ben Stiller.
Well, before that, it was a short story by James Thurber, very short story, that was turned into a Danny Kaye movie in the 40s called The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. And Walter Mitty is basically the guy, just an ordinary guy, nerdy guy, who makes up these fantastic stories, these heroic stories, and casts himself as the main character in these stories. And that's what Danny Kaye was doing, trying to impress the girls by saying, well, I did this, I did that, and I'm a war hero. Basically, Frank did the same thing. He was fixated on Vietnam in particular because it was happening when he was a teenager. And so he read everything he could on Vietnam and then ended up making up stories about himself being in the Marine Corps, being sent to Vietnam, actually being recruited into some kind of special program. He was some kind of special forces guy.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So
right. I'm like, right. This is like, you're blowing my mind. None of this is true?
No. And it turns out that Frank is not the only one who makes up stories like this about his military heroics. And there's it's a phenomenon that's called stolen valor. Now, back when I met Frank, that term did not exist. Some people started doing research on this because, like, if you're a real veteran, if you've really been in Vietnam, and then you find out that people are faking it and saying, "I won all these medals, I was in Vietnam, this hero." Well, it really irks you, okay?
To say the least.
Yeah. So there's this book called Stolen Valor. I've got a copy of it here. They came up with this term, stolen valor, and Frank is even in the book. Frank is actually one of the people that they researched
after Bloodsport came out and all that stuff.
I think it was after Bloodsport came out, right, because they mentioned Bloodsport in the book.
So wait a minute. So this is okay. So because I remember when Bloodsport came out, is that it was promoted as a true story. That was one of the biggest selling points of the film. You were like, this so surreal, like this really happened. I have to ask you, before we get to Jean-Claude, how the hell did this get passed? Like, this was a Warner Brother. It was a Canon release. It was a Canon production, but Warner Brother released.
No, it was a Canon release. Canon had their own releasing company at the time.
If I remember correctly, Warner Brothers was involved in some way, shape, or form with the release of that. Wasn't? Maybe video.
Video.
Yeah, but the video.
Canon went bankrupt. They went belly up, and then Warner Brothers and I believe MGM raided their video library, and they got the rights to a lot of their stuff.
Right.
So Warner Brothers picked up Bloodsport.
Got it. That's how I knew it.
Not involved. Now, there was an article. See, Frank was telling these stories to everybody, including the editor of Black Belt magazine, who bought into it. Okay, now I didn't know shit about the martial arts world. I had not even seen Enter the Dragon before I got involved with Frank and Bloodsport. But he showed me this article in Black Belt magazine. Okay, there's no better authority.
You're of course
on the internet back then. But here's Black Belt magazine, and here's an article called Kumite: A Learning Experience, and it's all about Frank Dukes. And Black Belt magazine is saying that this has some validity to it. Who am I to say it's bullshit? Okay, I can't do a Google search. All right. So I bought into it.
So it's like Catch Me If You Can, the guy from Catch Me If You Can. Like he's just telling us.
Absolutely.
He's just telling story, and he's getting it to at such a high level of artistry in this the BS that he's throwing out there, that he's got now proof from legitimate people. So now all of these things are coming together, and I'm assuming you hear about this and you're going to say, I got to write the script for this, right? Is that how it goes?
Well, kind of. Basically, look, Frank told me lots of stories, okay? Frank used to tell people that he was awarded the Medal of Honor for his heroics in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. Not just me, plenty of people. So he would tell me stories. And some of this stuff was published in magazines. You got some of the stuff in the magazines about his various heroics and how he won all these medals. There's a photograph of him. I could get you the book, actually, if you want to see. There's a photograph of him wearing all these ribbons.
So he's all the way in. He's all in. He is all in on this con. He is all in.
It's a con, and he's a con man, basically.
Yeah, it's a con. I mean, this is
and he's really good.
Look, listen. We all might exaggerate a story here or there in our lifetimes, and you're like, oh, this or that. Fine, but this is a whole other level.
He invented a myth, a legend. He even calls himself the myth, the legend, the real Frank Dukes, and it's all bullshit. So,
oh my God.
Yeah, it's pretty damn amazing.
So the story for Bloodsport, like, did you make that story up, or did Frank help you just come up with the story and you just wrote the script? How did the creation of it come?
Well, it wasn't Frank. See, there's a difference between story and the real, like, facts, information. I forgot what the term is right now for what it is. Oh, source material. Mm-hmm. It's called source. According to the Writers Guild, there's source material, which is not the same as a story. Source material is the raw facts. Okay, like Erin Brockovich. Well, her story was source material. The movie Gandhi's life,
Story,
source material.
Sure.
But Gandhi write the script? No, he didn't. But this is my true life story. Well, Frank was telling people this is his true life story. So he had been telling me all these tales about the Kumite. He told me about, and I read the article. I've got the article here.
Yeah.
I could send it to you if you need some visuals to go along.
Sure.
Got the article. I've got all this stuff on Frank, the stolen valor.
Yeah.
Picture of him in the Marine Corps uniform. And turns out, so there are people that have started a couple of groups out there that do research into stolen valor.
Right.
Because they just got tired of hearing this shit. Okay, people lying about their credentials, lying about people that were not even in the military, saying that they were in the military and they won medals. Frank, it turns out, once these people started doing their research, then I found out what was true about Frank, because they got the military records from the government and they published this stuff. And basically, Frank was in the Marine Corps Reserves. So he actually went to Marine Corps boot camp, but that was about it. He was in the reserves, and he was a wireman, which means a guy who climbs up on a pole and strings communications wire. That's what he did.
He was a pole man, right?
Yeah. So he was never sent overseas. There was nothing in his military record about any kind of specialized training.
Well, that's what they. But Sheldon, that's what they want you to think. Obviously, it's all behind the scenes. It's been it's blacklisted.
That's Frank.
I can't show it to you because I was in it. It's secret. Don't you understand?
Right. Yeah. The government is basically they've redacted everything.
That's what I'm saying.
It's the government. They're going to tell you that I'm lying, but I'm telling you the truth. And he wrote a book about himself.
Oh my God!
Called Secret Man.
Stolen Valor. Sure. Got it. Yeah. I got it.
And Frank's not the only one in here, because
it's a pretty thick book, I'm assuming. Yeah, sure.
There's a lot of people who have been doing this. Which is, I just could not conceive of it at the time. I just couldn't believe, somebody's going to say that they were in the military and they were.
Yeah, sure.
No, who would lie about something like that? But here we go. Look, I don't know how well you can see it.
Yeah, the bottom one. Yeah.
And the top, that's him in his uniform.
With
all these medals. Okay, and the bottom one is one of his karate poses.
Oh my God.
I don't know if it's got the. And there's his Kumite trophy. Okay, he's posing with
a Kumite trophy. Got it.
Yes, absolutely. Which a reporter
doesn't exist
from the LA Times ended up doing some research, and he found out that this is a trophy that he had made for himself at a local trophy shop in North Hollywood, and the guy even had the receipt for the money that Frank paid for. Now here's his book. Okay. An American Warrior's Uncensored Story. He was the CIA's finest covert operative. Okay, here's the back of it.
I can't. This is pure con man.
Oh, absolutely.
Wow. This is pure con man.
Absolutely, yeah.
This is not even just telling stories. You've written a book of lies. You've taken pictures. You falsified stuff. This is a sickness. This is an illness.
This is Catch Me If You Can, and we've caught him. Okay?
All right. So we
still won't admit it.
So we established that he's an absolute crazy person, but out of this insanity comes an '80s action classic. Now, how did Jean-Claude get involved with you and Bloodsport? Because essentially, if I remember correctly, I followed Jean-Claude very, very well when he was just at that time. So No Retreat, No Surrender, I think was his first appearance. Black Eagle, I remember, was right there, and then came Bloodsport.
Okay, I'm going to give you the backstory and the chronology here.
Okay.
Because there was no Jean-Claude involved early on. Basically, Frank had been telling me all these stories forever. And one day we're driving in my car, and he's telling me about the Kumite, and he says, well, we had a nickname for it because it was very bloody, because it was no holds barred, there'd be blood all over the mat. So we actually, me and the other fighter, we called it Bloodsport. And like, Bloodsport? Whoa, is that a great title for a movie?
He came up with the name too.
You know what, Frank? Come to think of it, all these stories you've been telling me about the Kumite and the article in Black Belt Magazine, that's a movie. That's a movie. You know, we should sit down and write this. And we never did. We did not sit down and write it. Okay, but we talked about it. And so now I had a title, Bloodsport. Many months later, I'm editing this short film that I made, which is a whole other story. But I took there was one scene that I wrote for Tracers that was a bit too big to put on a stage.
Right.
So the director decided, we can't use this one. Well, I really liked the story, so later on I decided, you know what, I'm going to make a short movie and use that story and some of the dialogue there. Mm-hmm. So I made this little movie called Firefight, and in 16 millimeter, shot it at Camp Pendleton. Mm-hmm. This is something I totally put together, and actually got Frank Dukes actually plays one of the characters in it, because Frank saw himself as an actor. He thought he had the chops, movie star.
Right. So you're editing the short.
I'm editing the short in some very low budget post-production house in Hollywood, and next door to me, a guy named Mark DeSalle has got an editor working on one of his little films, which were porno films. Mark was producing porno films at the time. Mm-hmm. And so I got to talking with his editor and told him, yeah, I'm a writer, and this is a little movie that I wrote and directed. And he tells me one day, hey, my boss, Mark, wants to take you out to lunch and talk about a movie project that he wants to have written. So fine. So I meet Mark. We go to lunch nearby. And Mark has this theory about movies that everything runs in cycles. So, there's a cycle of science fiction movies. Lots of them get made, and nobody makes any of them. There's horror movies. Lots of them get made, nobody makes any. Well, same is true for martial arts movies. And there haven't been any martial arts movies made lately. And so I want to do a martial arts movie. I want to put a martial arts movie together. And the story he pitched to me was called Kickboxer. Okay, so this is like the very early version of Kickboxer. You know the story of Kickboxer.
Of course, yeah, of course.
Kurt does not have a brother in the story that Mark first pitched me. But he defeats Tong Po in a fight back in the U.S., and Tong Po wants to get vengeance, so he sneaks into Kurt's house at night and throws a kick at Kurt. But Kurt either ducks or for some reason he doesn't get hit, but his mother comes walking behind him. Tong Po kicks his mother in the head. Ooh. And kills his mother.
That's a rough visual, even for the 80s. Yeah, even for the 80s, that's a rough visual.
Anyway, that was Mark's idea, Kickboxer.
Sure.
And so I listened to this, and I think, okay, well, this is kind of lame, but I've got something much better. So I said, Mark, look, I got a better idea for a martial arts movie. It's called Bloodsport. Well, Bloodsport. Wow, is that a great title? So I tell him about Frank Dukes and the Kumite, and this it's a true story based on this guy going, the first Westerner to participate in it and win. Mm-hmm. And the guy lives right here in LA. If you'd like to meet him, I can set up a meeting and we can talk about this further. So that was the next step. Basically, I introduced Frank Dukes to Mark DeSalle. Mark DeSalle's liking all this. And I think at this point, I had already been hired to write Rambo 3. So he knew I was writing Rambo 3. So that was kind of a feather in my cap. And so he's thinking, well, if this guy's working on Rambo 3, he must be a good writer. Anyways, Mark makes a deal with both of us. and we signed contracts. And he hires me to write Bloodsport, and he makes another contract with Frank for the rights to his, quote, true life story. Okay? And this is all memorialized on paper in contracts, okay? And so I end up writing the script for Mark. And Mark gets the script over to Cannon Films. It's kind of a long story. Basically, he got it to Cannon. Cannon was doing really good with karate movies at the time. They were doing those ninja movies. They were doing Chuck Norris movies. Well, here's another martial arts movie. It's called Bloodsport. Great title. Based on a true story. That's pretty cool. We can use that in the advertising. So Cannon ends up financing this film. We're making a deal with Mark. And then we had no star. We had no actor. I wrote the script for Mark. We had no actor in mind. We just knew this is a cool idea. It's a great title. It's based on a true story. So now we had to find somebody to play this character, Frank Dukes, who would have been in his 20s at the time. And I wouldn't say a number, there were not many names that you could plug into that role. We had talked about, like Chuck Norris's name was mentioned, but Chuck was, I think, in his 50s at the time.
Right.
40s or 50s. He was too old to play this character. And I think Cannon was already working with Michael Dudikoff at the time, but Michael Dudikoff was not a martial artist.
He was an actor, right?
He was an actor. And they basically faked it with Michael Dudikoff. And we were all thinking, we need a real martial artist for this movie to make it believable. And then there's the famous story about Jean-Claude. Apparently this is true. I've heard it repeated a number of times in exactly the same way.
And from Jean-Claude himself, I'm assuming.
From Jean-Claude and from Michel Kesey, his buddy, who was there with him. But Jean-Claude had gone to the Cannes Film Festival a couple of years earlier, and he was basically going from office to office saying, hey, I'm Jean-Claude Van Damme. I'm going to be a big star. You should sign me. And Menachem was one of the people that he saw. And so he and Michel are driving down La Cienega Boulevard. And Jean-Claude says, hey, look, there's Menachem Golan. He was coming out of a restaurant. Do a quick U-turn. They pull up right in front of Menachem. And Jean-Claude goes up to him and says, hey, Menachem, remember me, Jean-Claude Van Damme? And he does one of his kicks. Basically, he used to do this to everybody. He would throw a kick at your face and miss your nose by 2 inches. He did that to Menachem. And Menachem just happened to be looking for an actor to play Frank Dukes in Bloodsport. And he gives Jean-Claude his card and says, you'll come to my office tomorrow. And they used to have an office on San Vicente and Wilshire. And Jean-Claude goes there the next day, right. And Menachem gives him the Bloodsport script. And the
rest is history.
The rest is history. Yeah, the rest.
If I remember, in my Jean-Claude lore, I remember seeing Jean-Claude in a little film called Break-In as an extra in the background, and that's a Cannon film. That was a Cannon film.
It's a Cannon film, but he was just an extra. Menachem didn't know who the hell he was. Nobody did.
He was just an extra, and all of a sudden, like, you're watching this, like years later, you're watching Break-In, and you just go, "Is that Jean-Claude Van Damme dancing in the background?" And it was.
So wait, so there's another movie we have to insert here, because it just so happened that at the time all of this was going on, we're looking for an actor. No Retreat, No Surrender.
Right.
In L.A. And Mark calls me and Frank and says, hey, looks like we might be making this movie with Cannon. And there's this young actor that I want you guys to take a look at. His name is Jean-Claude Van Damme. And let me know what you think, okay? So Frank and I go to see No Retreat, No Surrender in North Hollywood, I believe. And we're blown away. We thought he was fantastic.
Oh, he's the best part of that movie, no question.
Absolutely.
No question.
Right. So we call Mark, and we give him a ringing endorsement. Like, yeah, this guy's perfect. And next thing we know, they're getting a director, and they're scouting Hong Kong. They had a deal. Menachem had a deal with a Hong Kong producer named Charlie Wang, who had a production company in Hong Kong and had all the cameras, everything he needed.
Yeah.
And so they basically, this is supposed to be a very low budget film. I think the budget was like 1.1 million.
Jesus.
And one thing led to another, and
there he is.
They got Newt Arnold was hired to direct it, and Newt was a second unit, not second unit director. He was a first AD. He's a very well-known first AD. In fact, I believe he was the first AD on Blade Runner and some other very famous movies. But he'd never directed anything. And he had saved one of Cannon's movies. They were having trouble with one of their movies. I guess they had to replace the director, so they ended up using Newt to be like the ghost director for this movie. And Menachem was kind of impressed with them, and he said, "Look, because you're doing such a good job for me, if you keep on doing a good job, I'm going to give you a movie to direct." So they got Bloodsport, and Menachem gives it to Newt Arnold, and
the rest, as they say, is history.
History.
Now, so Bloodsport, I remember, comes out. I don't remember seeing it in the theater. I think there was a theatrical for it.
Well, I got a whole story for that. Because Menachem hated the movie. Now, the very first cut was really bad. Mm-hmm. All right, I saw the first cut with Jean-Claude and Frank Dukes, and we were depressed. They had, I think, Carl Kress was the editor at the time, and he just didn't know how to cut a movie like this. He was like an old-time Hollywood guy,
right.
Hollywood editor, and didn't know how to do the quick cuts. Really didn't get a movie like this at all. So the movie was terrible. Menachem thought it was terrible, and somehow Menachem got convinced that they should bring another editor on. And I can't remember the guy's name now, but they did bring on another editor who completely ripped it apart, put it back together again, and turned it into what it is.
A classic, as they say today. As a classic, as they say today.
And the first version that we saw did not have the music. This got some pretty cool music. Pretty cool
I love that soundtrack. I love that soundtrack.
And so it had none of that. And suddenly it's a much better movie.
Right.
But Menachem was still remembering that first version, and he did not want to release this in theaters. And we're talking about like the mid '80s. Like everything got released in theaters back then. All right, you didn't go straight to VHS on anything unless it was a real stinker. And Menachem thought this was a real stinker. And I'll tell you how I know this from firsthand experience, because at the time I'd been writing a number of scripts for an actor named Leon Isaac Kennedy. Do you remember Leon by any chance?
I don't.
He starred in a couple of blaxploitation films called Penitentiary.
Okay.
And then Menachem, I think, produced Penitentiary 2, and then he ended up doing another movie with Leon for Cannon called Body and Soul. It was a remake of an old John Garfield movie. So Menachem knew Leon, and Leon co-starred in a Chuck Norris movie called Lone Wolf McQuade.
Great movie.
Okay, you know Lone Wolf. Leon was the black guy in Lone Wolf McQuade.
Got it.
And that movie did fairly well, and Leon thought they should do a sequel, because my character would come back in the sequel. So I think Chuck wanted to do a sequel also, but the sequel wasn't happening. So Leon had me write a script that was going to be a sequel to Lone Wolf McQuade, except we had a different title to it. And it was going to be very much like Lone Wolf McQuade. It was going to be a white guy who was the lead, the Chuck Norris role, and Leon was the co-lead. Leon's character was the co-lead. So I wrote this script, and Leon gets it to Menachem and Cannon, and Menachem likes the script. Leon said that I was interested in directing, and Menachem was gonna he was going to let me direct the movie. In fact, because I made this little film Firefight, which I blew up to 35 millimeter, it looked pretty impressive. It was a little movie. So Menachem saw that and decided he was going to give me a chance. So they were going to hire me to direct this. It was called Strikers Force. That was the name of the script. And Chuck Norris did not want to do it. So Leon, I had introduced Jean-Claude to Leon Isaac Kennedy. They hit it off. And Leon and I both thought, well, hey, this guy Jean-Claude should be your co-lead in Strikers Force. And Jean-Claude has got a 3-picture deal with Cannon Films, and you've got a deal with Cannon Films. So Leon decides, I'm going to just take this straight to Menachem and tell him, let's do this movie. Cannon, they wanted to do the movie. Menachem wanted to do the movie with me directing. And let's suggest to him that Jean-Claude Van Damme should be the co-lead. So we go to his office, and he says his term for Van Damme. He thought Bloodsport was terrible. He basically told me this to my face. It's a terrible movie. I'm not going to embarrass myself by releasing it in theaters. We're going to go straight to video. And well, what about Jean-Claude Van Damme? You got a 3-picture deal with him. Van Damme is poison. He called him poison. he thought Jean-Claude was a terrible actor. And he said, look, I want this movie to be successful, so I'm going to give you a real movie star. You're going to have a real movie star in the lead role, and that's Michael Dudikoff. Van Damme is poison. Michael Dudikoff is a movie star. So anyways, I gave Jean-Claude the bad news, and he was very upset about
this.
This
is pre-release of Bloodsport.
Correct. Pre-release. Nobody knew who the hell this Van Damme guy was. Yeah. Anyways, so I had a meeting with Michael Dudikoff about this project. He didn't like the script. Ended up going nowhere.
Sure.
Somebody at Cannon, we had the new editor's name was Michael J. Duthie, by the way. And Michael fixed some movies for Cannon. They brought him in to fix movies that were a mess. He was like a film doctor, basically, and he recut a few other films. So they brought him in to try and save Bloodsport, and he did. He saved Bloodsport big time. Somebody at Cannon decided, you know what, people are kind of liking the movie. We should maybe give it a chance. Why don't we try releasing it just on the West Coast? California, Oregon, and Washington. Let's give it a test run. I think they might have done 25 prints. So they tried that, and it did really well because the title drew people in. The poster, based on a true story, the movie did well. And then they decided, well, okay, let's
roll it out
nationwide. And they opened it nationwide. And it's funny, I made a bet with Menachem. Fortunately for him, he didn't put any money down on it. But his big movie at the time, when we had this meeting in his office, was Missing in Action 3. Okay, Missing in Action 3 with Chuck Norris, and they changed the title, so now it was Braddock Missing in Action 3, like they did with Rambo. Right. First Blood, now it's Rambo First Blood 2. So Menachem decided to use the same tactic, and he figured, okay, this one's going to explode. This is going to do huge business. And I told him to his face, okay, Menachem, if you release Bloodsport in theaters, it's going to do better than Missing in Action 3. And he laughed. He said, you're dreaming, my friend. And those were his words. You're dreaming. Okay.
It's a good impression of him, by the way. It's a very good impression. It's a good impression.
Yeah, well, I knew Menachem well. I had many meetings with him. But I've worked with a number of Israeli producers, actually, including Menachem's successor was really Avi Lerner. He's not as big and as theatrical. In fact, he's not big and theatrical at all. He's very low key. But Menachem was very big theatrical, like the Zero Mostel. And so they ended up releasing it nationwide, and it did really well. I think it was Cannon's highest grossing movie of that year. And we're not talking about huge numbers, but this is back in the 80s. So
if it made like $5, $6, $7 million, that's a huge.
I think it was even more than that.
Yeah, that's huge.
Even more than that. So they were really impressed. And
then it really found it all. I mean, once it hit video, it was a perfect timing, because when that video dropped, it was in the, I was talking, I think, with 86, 87, I think, somewhere around the world when it dropped, because I couldn't keep it in the store. At the video store I was working, I worked at a mom and pop video store. We had to keep getting copies of it because people would rent it all the time. So people were like, what should we watch? We just like, go watch Bloodsport. And it was a constant. So I know it found a massive audience. So it hit like when VHS was starting to take off, Bloodsport shows up, and it's just kind of like when Terminator showed up with HBO, and there was just timing situations that just worked out, and it exploded. To watch the rest of this interview, head over to indiefilmhustle.com.